My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had always been a storm cloud on the horizon of my marriage, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the Category 5 hurricane she unleashed last Tuesday. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a seismic shift that threatened to swallow my entire world, leaving me to choose between the life I'd built with my husband, David, and the very essence of my being. I'd always known I wasn't her favorite, a perpetual outsider in her meticulously curated family tableau, but the venom she spat, the accusations she hurled at her own son, were a betrayal so profound it still echoes on the quiet corners of our condo. Yet, in that maelstrom, a strange sense of gratitude bloomed for David, my rock, my anchor, who, against all odds, stood firm. He reminded me of the old adage, one I'd always dismissed as quaint: don't try to impose your rules where they don't belong. Eleanor is a rare, almost mythical visitor in our lives. She lives and works in a remote, snow-dusted town in Alaska, a place as far removed from our bustling New York City apartment as one could imagine. Her appearances are sporadic, once a year for lucky, sometimes less. This visit, her second since David and I exchanged vows 6 years ago, was different. Her first had been a tense, suffocating affair, a battle of wills I barely survived. This time, however, she managed to push me to the brink of sanity in record time, her presence a constant, grating hum beneath the surface of our carefully constructed peace. David and I are in a race against time, a silent, relentless marathon to pay off the mortgage on our 2-bedroom condo. Every spare penny, every extra hour is poured into this singular goal. Vacations are a distant dream, holidays a luxury we can't afford, and the thought of maternity leave, for me, is a bittersweet ache I've learned to suppress. David, a brilliant software engineer, pulls in a substantial salary, working the standard 9 to 5. But standard is a loose term in his world. His official 6 p.m. clockout often stretches to 9 or even 10 p.m., fueled by caffeine and an unwavering dedication to our future. My schedule, by stark contrast, is a nocturnal ballet. I'm a remote graphic designer for a Japanese firm, which means my workday begins when most of New York is settling into bed, around 1 a.m. This inverted rhythm means I sleep during the day, a necessity that has become both a blessing and a curse. I know, it's far from ideal, especially since it throws our sleep patterns completely out of sync. But the compensation is phenomenal. Just one more year, Dave and I promised each other, one more year of this demanding dance, and that mortgage will be a distant memory. It's a sacrifice, a shared burden, but one we've both agreed is worth enduring. In essence, David and I navigate our days, much like any other couple, our paths crossing in the mornings and evenings. The only real difference is the choreography of our goodbyes and greetings. After breakfast, he heads to his office, and I, after tackling a few household chores, retreat to the quiet sanctuary of our bedroom for my day. Flame, our evenings are a mirror image. As he winds down for bed, I'm just revving up, preparing for my digital canvas. I become a creature of habit, my internal clock finally tuned to this unique rhythm. I wake David, we share breakfast, I see him off, then I finish my work, and by 11 a.m. I'm usually tucked in. I'll often prep dinner, load the dishwasher, run the vacuum, and then finally surrender to sleep. I typically rise around 7 or 8 p.m., sometimes 9, depending on whether dinner needs cooking or how late I manage to fall asleep. My evenings are a whirlwind of domesticity. Laundry cycles, quick grocery runs, a myriad of small tasks that keep our home running smoothly. Then, the best part of my day, David's return. I feed him, listen to his day, and then, as he drifts off to sleep, I prepare for my own nocturnal shift. It's a system, a well-oiled machine, and frankly, there's nothing remotely scandalous about it. Or so I thought. Eleanor's arrival shattered that illusion. The moment she grasped the intricacies of our schedule, her face contorted into a mask of pure horror. "It's unnatural," she declared, her voice laced with a theatrical disgust. "A husband and wife should sleep together. This isn't how a proper marriage works." She grumbled, she fumed, but eventually she seemed to concede, albeit reluctantly. David, ever the diplomat, gently asked her to respect my need for daytime sleep, and she, with a dismissive wave of her hand, promised she would. A promise, I would soon discover as fragile as spun sugar. That very first day, her promise evaporated into the thin New York air. I was jolted awake by a cacophony of shouts, a booming monologue that reverberated through our thin apartment walls. Eleanor was on the phone, or rather, at the phone, her voice so piercingly loud that I doubted the person on the other end even needed the receiver. She was practically screaming, her words echoing down the hallway. I checked the clock, a cruel digital reminder that I'd only managed 2 precious hours of sleep. Dragging myself from the depths of slumber, my body heavy with exhaustion, I stumbled into the living room. "Eleanor," I began, my voice a strained whisper. "Could you please lower your voice? I really need to sleep." I chose my words with surgical precision, each one carefully selected to avoid an explosion, though a torrent of far less polite phrases clawed at the back of my throat. She pursed her lips, a familiar gesture of disdain, but gave a regal nod. Then, with a flourish, she announced she was going out. I was just on the cusp of reclaiming sleep, the sweet oblivion beckoning, when the front door slammed shut with such force it rattled the very foundations of our building. My sleep, already a fragile thing, was utterly shattered. Fine, I thought, maybe I can catch up later. I resigned myself to a day of chores, my mind buzzing with a dull, persistent ache. Eleanor returned around 4 p.m., a triumphant glint in her eye, laden with shopping bags. She looked utterly pleased with herself, oblivious to the wreckage she'd left in her wake. By then, I had tidied the apartment, prepared a simple dinner, and was finally, desperately, ready to collapse. My eyelids felt like lead weights. I managed to send a quick text to David, a truncated account of the day's events, and began to drift off, the sweet embrace of unconsciousness just moments away. Then, without a knock, without a warning, Eleanor burst into the room. "Look how beautiful this is," she exclaimed, holding up a garish, sequin top. "Does it suit me?" Her eyes, sharp and assessing, finally landed on my exhausted form. She clicked her tongue, a sound of pure annoyance, and huffed out of the room. My jaw tightened, a knot of pure fury coiling in my stomach, but I bit back the retorts. I finally succumbed to sleep, a deep, heavy slumber that almost made me late for work. I woke with a throbbing headache, my body protesting every movement. I powered through my shift, fueled by sheer willpower and a growing resentment. That night, as my shift drew to a close, I made a silent vow. The moment my work was done, I was going straight to bed. Let the world burn, I didn't care. At 9 a.m., I slammed my laptop shut, the sound of final, defiant punctuation mark to my workday, and stumbled towards the bedroom. My eyes were heavy, my head a dull throb. I was just about to surrender to sleep when Eleanor once again appeared in the doorway. "Before you fall asleep," she chirped, her voice saccharine sweet. "Can you tell me where the mixer, flour, and baking soda are? I'm going to make pancakes." I bit back a string of curses, my teeth grinding together. But I got up, my movements stiff with exhaustion, and pointed out the ingredients. In my sleep-deprived haze, it didn't even register that she would actually use the mixer while I was trying to sleep. An hour later, the shrill, grinding roar of the mixer ripped me from my fragile slumber. I let a strangled cry of pure frustration. I marched out of the room, my voice tight with suppressed anger, and demanded silence. Without even glancing at Eleanor, I retreated to the bedroom, pulling a pillow over my head. This time, I was determined to sleep, no matter the cost. And I succeeded. I woke around 7 p.m., my head finally clear, the apartment blissfully silent. Eleanor was gone. No pancakes either, I noted with a wry smile. Good riddance. I showered, cooked dinner, and was just finishing up wiping down the counters when Eleanor returned, her face a thundercloud of displeasure. "How long is this going to continue?" she demanded, her eyes narrowed. I knew instantly she was talking about my work schedule. Until we pay off the mortgage, I replied, my voice calm. Then we'll be free with a clear conscience. Are you sure your marriage will survive until then? She sneered, a cruel glint in her eye. I didn't dignify her provocative question with a direct answer. I simply offered a tight, polite smile. Then David arrived home, and I was momentarily spared from Eleanor's oppressive presence. That day, surprisingly, ended without further incident. Her third day as our guest, however, was a different story. It began with a bang, or rather, a blare. I'd gone to bed, desperately hoping for an uninterrupted sleep, when Eleanor decided to embark on a late-night cooking spree. To combat her boredom, she cranked up music on her phone, the tinny beat thumping through the walls. I tried to fall asleep, but it was impossible. I've always struggled with insomnia, and the added external noise was a torment. After 40 agonizing minutes of tossing and turning, I finally gave up. I went to the kitchen, my patience worn thin, and asked her as politely as I could to turn down the music. My request was met with a furious clatter. She hurled a spoon into the sink, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and then she exploded. Am I allowed to breathe in this house, or does that bother you too? You've invented some delusion for yourself, sitting at the computer all night and sleeping all day, and no one should touch her, the princess. If you wanted to sleep, you would sleep. Nothing would bother you. Am I supposed to sit still in my son's house, quieter than water, lower than grass? Don't do this, don't do that. I'm a guest, not in prison. Her voice rose to a shrill crescendo, each word a poison dart aimed directly at me. I'm not sitting at the computer, I'm working. I shot back, my own anger finally bubbling to the surface. Unfortunately, you didn't provide your son with an apartment, so we have to manage as best we can. And right now, this is how we can. And this isn't just your son's house, it's ours. Working, she says. Eleanor scoffed, her eyes wide with mock disbelief. What kind of work is that? On the computer all night? One word led to another, a verbal brawl that dredged up every past grievance, every unspoken resentment, real or imagined. We hurled accusations, defended ourselves with bitter ferocity, until finally, exhausted, we retreated to our separate corners. I heard Eleanor's voice, muffled but unmistakable, as she called David, pouring out her grievances, painting me as the villain. Complain all you want, I thought. I have plenty to say, too. I didn't call him. Instead, I sent a detailed text message, laying out every infuriating incident, every sleepless moment. David's reply was swift. He would handle it that evening. The confrontation, when David finally arrived home, erupted with renewed intensity. I hadn't been able to sleep properly all day, my nerves frayed, catching only fragmented moments of rest, like a feverish dream. I was furious, a raw, exposed nerve. Eleanor, emboldened by David's presence, launched into another tirade, declaring our lifestyle an abomination, me a spoiled brat whom her son inexplicably indulged. And no, I certainly didn't stay silent this time. David, bless his heart, watched the spectacle unfold, his face a mask of weary resignation. Then, he did something that stunned us both. He sided with me. Eleanor's face, usually a canvas of self-righteous indignation, crumpled in disbelief. Mom, David began, his voice calm but firm. This is how we live. This is what we're used to. And yes, we don't particularly like this schedule, but it's what allows us to work and pay off our mortgage quickly. We didn't ask you for anything extraordinary, just to be quieter. How did you come to visit us? To explore the city, go shopping, attend concerts, museums. Instead, you're sitting at home and tormenting my wife. That's not right. So, you're going to kick your own mother out? Eleanor challenged, her eyebrow arched, a desperate plea for sympathy in her voice. I won't kick you out, David replied, his voice unwavering. "But I will take you to a hotel and get you a room." "I simply don't see any other option." Eleanor gasped, a strangled sound, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She said nothing, simply spun on her heel and began to pack her bags. Half an hour later, David drove her to a hotel. As I understood it, she was mortally offended, her pride wounded beyond repair, and would be changing her flight tickets the very next day. I didn't glow, not even a little. This wasn't a victory, it wasn't even a battle we wanted to fight. Everything could have unfolded peacefully, quietly, if only Eleanor had respected our home, our rules, and hadn't tried to impose her will where it clearly didn't belong. The days following Eleanor's abrupt departure were a strange mix of profound relief and lingering, almost phantom, tension. The silence in the apartment, once a constant battleground of noise and passive aggression, was now deafening, a stark contrast to the incessant hum of her disapproval. David and I, like two weary dancers, slowly, tentatively, fell back into the familiar rhythm of our lives, quiet mornings, late-night work, and the shared, unspoken hope for a future free from interference. Yet, an invisible question hung heavy in the air between us, a silent echo: had we truly done the right thing? David, ever my steadfast protector, assured me we had, his voice firm, his conviction unwavering that his mother's behavior had crossed an unforgivable line. But I could see the faint, almost imperceptible lines of worry etched around his eyes, the subtle clenching of his jaw when he thought I wasn't looking. Why, he had always been fiercely loyal, a son who cherished his mother despite her flaws. And while he stood by me, the chasm that had opened between him and Eleanor clearly pained him, a deep, internal wound that refused to heal. Our meticulously crafted routine, once a source of quiet efficiency and shared purpose, now felt fragile, constantly under the shadow of Eleanor's potential return, or worse, her silent, pervasive judgment. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, mistaking the distant rumble of the subway for her familiar, heavy footsteps, my heart leaping into my throat with a primal fear. The mortgage, once our shared obsession, now felt like a relentless, ticking clock, a constant, oppressive reminder of the immense sacrifices we were making, and the steep price we'd paid for our hard-won peace. We doubled down on our efforts, a desperate, unspoken pact. David, driven by a renewed sense of urgency, took on even more demanding projects at work, his hours stretching further into the night. I, in turn, pushed through my nocturnal shifts with an almost feverish intensity, fueled by a potent cocktail of exhaustion and determination. The goal, once a distant beacon, now burned brighter than ever. Pay off the condo, secure our future, and most importantly, create an impregnable sanctuary where Eleanor's toxic influence could never again reach. Weeks later, amidst the quiet rebuilding of our lives, a letter arrived. It was thick, heavy, and bore the official seal of a law firm in Anchorage, Alaska. Addressed to David, it brought news that stopped us both cold. His Aunt Beatrice, Eleanor's older sister, had passed away. Aunt Beatrice? The name conjured only vague, almost spectral images in David's mind. A reclusive artist, a woman who had lived a quiet, solitary life in a small, weather-beaten cabin nestled deep within the vast, unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. We knew she existed, of course, a forgotten branch on the family tree, rarely spoken of, almost deliberately erased from Eleanor's narrative. The letter, however, contained a bombshell. David was the sole beneficiary of her entire estate. We were utterly stunned. Eleanor had never once mentioned any close relationship with her sister, and David certainly hadn't. The estate, the letter vaguely hinted, was not just substantial, but surprisingly vast. A fortune accumulated through decades of shrewd investments and the quiet sale of her unique, abstract art. David, still raw from the emotional fallout with his mother, was deeply hesitant. "It feels wrong," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper as he stared at the official document, as if it held some dark, hidden secret. "Like I'm profiting from something I don't understand, something I have no right to." I, however, saw an opportunity, a chance to unravel some of the mysteries that shrouded his family. "It's your aunt, David," I urged, my hand resting gently on his arm. "Maybe there's more to this than we know. Maybe this is a chance to understand your family, and perhaps even your mother a little better." After much deliberation, we decided to fly to Alaska, a journey that felt both necessary and fraught with unspoken anxieties. The thought of potentially encountering Eleanor, who we assumed would also be there for her sister's affairs, was a heavy, suffocating weight that settled deep in my chest. Upon our arrival in the small, windswept town, a place that felt utterly disconnected from the rest of the world, we found Aunt Beatrice's cabin. It was rustic, yes, but possessed a charming, almost magical quality, its walls adorned with her vibrant, swirling, abstract paintings, each one a window into a complex, passionate soul. The lawyer, a kind, elderly woman named Martha, with eyes that held a lifetime of stories, greeted us warmly. She explained, her voice soft but firm, that Beatrice had specifically requested David handle her affairs, explicitly and unequivocally excluding Eleanor from any involvement. "Your aunt and your mother had a complicated relationship," Martha said gently, her gaze lingering on David, as if searching for echoes of Beatrice. "Beatrice always admired your independent spirit, David. She saw a lot of herself in you, a refusal to be bound by convention." As we meticulously sorted through Beatrice's eclectic belongings, a treasure trove of forgotten memories and artistic endeavors, we stumbled upon a hidden journal. Its pages, filled with elegant, flowing script, revealed a shocking, deeply personal truth that sent shivers down my spine. Beatrice, it turned out, had been far more than a reclusive artist. She had been a fierce, unwavering advocate for women's rights, a quiet rebel who had, for decades, secretly helped countless young women in the remote region. She provided them with vital resources, unwavering support, and a safe haven when they faced difficult, often life-altering choices. She had even, on numerous occasions, risked her own safety to help women escape abusive situations, offering them sanctuary and anonymity in her secluded cabin. The journal detailed her profound disappointment in Eleanor, who, according to Beatrice, had always prioritized societal expectations, appearances, and a rigid adherence to tradition over genuine compassion and empathy. There were veiled yet unmistakable references to a past family secret, a devastating decision Eleanor had made under immense duress, a decision that had haunted Beatrice for decades, casting a long, dark shadow over their relationship. The journal didn't explicitly state the nature of this secret, but the tone, the raw emotion bleeding through the elegant script, suggested something deeply personal, incredibly painful, and utterly transformative, something that had driven an irreparable wedge between the two sisters. This revelation, this intimate glimpse into Beatrice's world, cast Eleanor's earlier behavior, her rigid stance on her lifestyle, her unyielding insistence on traditional family dynamics, her almost pathological need for control in a new, unsettling, and deeply tragic light. Was her judgmental nature, her relentless criticism, merely a reflection of her own unresolved past, a desperate attempt to exert control over a world that had once controlled her? The inheritance itself was not just a sum of money, it was a meticulously crafted trust fund specifically dedicated to supporting women's shelters and reproductive rights organizations across the state, with David explicitly named as the sole trustee. Beatrice, in her carefully worded will, had explicitly stated that David was to continue her life's work, to be a champion for those who needed it most, to be the voice for the voiceless. This was more than just money. It was a sacred legacy, a profound responsibility that felt both daunting in its scope and profoundly meaningful in its purpose. We returned to New York, the immense weight of Beatrice's legacy pressing down on our shoulders, a silent, powerful force. David, once hesitant and unsure, now felt a fierce, almost spiritual sense of purpose ignite within him. He immediately began researching the organizations Beatrice had supported, immersing himself completely in the complex, often heartbreaking, world of advocacy. He started attending meetings, devouring reports, learning about the systemic challenges women faced, the insidious barriers they encountered at every turn. This new focus, while undeniably inspiring and noble, also created a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in our dynamic. He was often preoccupied, his mind miles away, grappling with the immense complexities of his new role, the weight of so many lives resting on his shoulders. I supported him, of course, with every fiber of my being, but a part of me felt a growing distance, a quiet, unsettling unease. The mortgage, once our shared, all-consuming obsession, now seemed secondary, almost trivial, compared to this grander, more impactful mission that had consumed David's every waking thought. One evening, as David was engrossed in a video conference, his voice a low murmur discussing the intricacies of a new women's health initiative, I decided to tackle the overflowing laundry basket, a mundane task that offered a brief respite from the emotional intensity of our lives. As I sorted through his clothes, a small, faded photograph, brittle with age, slipped from the pocket of an old, forgotten jacket. It was a picture of David, much younger, perhaps in his early 20s, his face boyish and carefree, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was undeniably beautiful, with a radiant, almost ethereal smile and eyes that sparkled with a gentle kindness. And she was clearly, unmistakably, pregnant. My heart seized in my chest, a cold, icy grip. I knew David had a past before me, of course, a life lived before our paths intertwined, but he had never once mentioned a serious relationship, let alone one that involved a pregnancy. A cold, creeping dread washed over me, a sickening wave of fear and confusion. Who was this woman? And why had David kept her a secret, a ghost haunting the corridors of his past? I confronted him that night, the faded photograph clutched so tightly in my hand that the edges began to curl. His face, usually so open and honest with me, drained of all color, paling to an ashen gray. He stammered, his words catching in his throat, his gaze darting away from mine, unable to meet my accusing eyes. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the crushing weight of years of unspoken guilt, he confessed. Her name was Sarah. They had been college sweethearts, their love a whirlwind of youthful passion and naive dreams. She had gotten pregnant unexpectedly, a terrifying, life-altering surprise that had thrown their young lives into disarray. David, barely out of his teens, terrified and overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation, had been paralyzed by indecision. He had wanted to do the right thing, to support her, to be a father, but his mother, Eleanor, had intervened with a force that brooked no argument. Eleanor, he explained, had been vehemently, almost hysterically, against them keeping the baby. She had argued with a chilling intensity that it would utterly ruin his future, that he was far too young, far too unprepared for such a monumental responsibility. She had, in fact, relentlessly pressured Sarah to have an abortion, even going so far as to offer to pay for the procedure, a chilling echo of the very choices Beatrice had fought against. Sarah, devastated by Eleanor's relentless interference and David's own agonizingly wavering resolve, had ultimately made the most difficult decision of her life, to terminate the pregnancy. She had then, heartbroken and disillusioned, left town, cutting all ties with David and his family, vanishing without a trace, a silent casualty of Eleanor's manipulative machinations. He had never seen her again. The guilt, he admitted, had gnawed at him for years, a constant, festering wound in his soul. He had tried, desperately, to find her, to apologize, to make amends, to somehow undo the damage, but she had simply disappeared, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions and profound regret. He had kept it a secret, he said, because he was consumed by shame, a deep, burning shame that he couldn't bear to share, and because he didn't want to burden me, the woman he loved, with his past mistakes, his profound failures. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. The irony was brutal, a cruel, almost unbearable twist of fate. Eleanor, the self-appointed arbiter of morality, who had so vehemently judged our lifestyle, had once orchestrated a similar, if not more profound, interference in her own son's life, forcing a choice that had left deep, irreparable scars on everyone involved. This secret, buried for so long beneath layers of denial and shame, now lay exposed between us, a gaping, festering wound that threatened to consume everything we had built. I understood his pain, his profound shame, his youthful terror, but the deception, The years of carefully constructed silence felt like an unforgivable betrayal. How could he have kept something so monumental, so life-altering from me, his wife, his partner, and everything? It cast a long, dark shadow over our entire relationship, making me question everything I thought I knew about him, about us. The trust, once absolute and unwavering, now felt fractured, shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. We spent days in a tense, suffocating silence, punctuated only by strained, agonizing conversations that went nowhere, circling the same painful truths without ever truly confronting them. The intimacy we once shared, the effortless connection that had defined our marriage, now felt distant, replaced by a vast, echoing chasm of unspoken accusations, unresolved grief, and a profound sense of loss. It's strange how these dark family secrets connect us. If this story is getting under your skin, subscribe for more real family exposés. The tension between David and me was a palpable, suffocating presence, a constant low hum beneath the surface of our lives. We were barely speaking, each of us retreating into our own corners of hurt, confusion, and silent recrimination. It was during this strained, almost unbearable period that Eleanor, unexpectedly, called David. Her voice, usually sharp, commanding, and laced with an almost regal disdain, was now subdued, almost fragile, a thin, reedy whisper that barely resembled the woman we knew. She had heard about Aunt Beatrice's will, about the substantial trust fund, and she wanted to talk. David, still raw from our recent, devastating revelations, was deeply reluctant, his instinct to avoid her almost overwhelming. But I urged him to go, my voice gentle but firm. Maybe, I suggested, a flicker of hope igniting within me. This is a chance for some kind of closure. For both of you? For all of us. He met her at a quiet, unassuming cafe in a neutral part of town, a place devoid of personal history or emotional baggage. When he returned, hours later, his face was a complex tapestry of shock, profound sadness, and a dawning, almost unbearable understanding. Eleanor, he recounted, had finally, completely confessed. The story of Sarah and the abortion, he learned, was even more complicated, more insidious than he had ever dared to imagine. Eleanor had not just pressured Sarah, she had actively, meticulously, and ruthlessly manipulated the entire situation. She had intercepted letters, fabricated elaborate stories, and even gone so far as to subtly threaten Sarah's vulnerable family, all to ensure that the pregnancy was terminated and David's future, her carefully constructed vision of his future, was secured. Her motive, she claimed, was love, a twisted, misguided attempt to protect her son from what she perceived as a life-altering, catastrophic mistake. But there was more, so much more, a deeper, darker truth that had festered beneath the surface for decades. Eleanor, it turned out, harbored her own devastating secret, a deeply buried trauma that had shaped her entire life, twisting her into the woman she had become. When she was a young woman, barely out of college, full of naive dreams and youthful vulnerability, she too had faced an unplanned pregnancy. Her family, strict, unyielding, and obsessed with appearances, had forced her to give the baby up for adoption, a decision that had ripped her soul apart. It had been a painful, traumatic, and utterly dehumanizing experience, one she had never truly recovered from, a wound that had festered, poisoning her spirit. The shame, the overwhelming sense of loss, the profound grief, had morphed into a bitter, corrosive resentment that she had unknowingly projected onto David and Sarah, onto me, onto anyone who dared to defy her rigid worldview. She had seen Sarah's pregnancy as a terrifying mirror of her own past, a cruel echo of her own suffering, and in her desperate, almost frantic need to prevent David from experiencing similar pain, she had, with a chilling inevitability, repeated the very cycle of control, coercion, and emotional devastation that had scarred her own life. She had been so desperate to spare him the pain she had endured that she had, in her brokenness, inflicted a different but equally devastating pain. Her confession, raw, tearful, and wrung from the depths of her tormented soul, revealed a woman utterly broken by her past. A woman who had, for decades, tried to control her son's life out of a twisted, pathological sense of protection. She admitted her mistakes, her voice choked with profound regret for the unimaginable pain she had caused, and for the very first time in her life, she truly, genuinely apologized. It wasn't a full absolution, not yet, not by a long shot, but it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative step towards healing. David, listening to his mother's heartbreaking story, saw her not just as the domineering, judgmental figure he had always known, but as a vulnerable, deeply wounded woman, scarred beyond recognition by her own history, a victim of a society that offered her no compassion. The thick, suffocating layers of resentment that had built up over a lifetime began to peel away, replaced by a fragile, nascent understanding, a glimmer of empathy. He saw the generational trauma, the insidious cycle of pain passed down through the years, and for the first time, he truly understood. This revelation, while profoundly shocking and deeply unsettling, also brought a strange, almost cathartic sense of clarity to our own fractured relationship. David's secrecy, while still undeniably hurtful, was now contextualized by his mother's manipulative, traumatic past. He'd been a victim of her relentless control, just as Sarah had been, just as Eleanor herself had been. It didn't excuse his actions, not entirely, but it offered a crucial path towards understanding, towards forgiveness. We began to talk, truly talk, for the first time in weeks, our voices raw with emotion, our hearts heavy with shared grief. The anger, once a raging inferno, slowly receded, replaced by a shared sense of profound sadness for the past, and a cautious, almost desperate hope for the future. The mortgage, the condo, even Aunt Beatrice's immense legacy all seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the profound, complex emotional landscape we were now navigating. We realized, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that our relationship, our future, depended not on external factors, not on money or possessions, but on our ability to confront these deep-seated wounds, to forgive, to heal, and to painstakingly rebuild trust, brick by painful brick. It was a long, arduous road ahead, fraught with uncertainty and emotional landmines. But for the first time in a very long time, we were walking it together, hand in hand, facing the ghosts of our past, and the uncertain yet undeniably hopeful future that lay before us. The fragile understanding that had begun to blossom between David and me, born from the raw, painful truth of Eleanor's confession, was tested almost immediately, pushed to its breaking point by the very legacy that had brought us to this precipice. The immense weight of Aunt Beatrice's inheritance, the substantial trust fund meticulously dedicated to women's rights and reproductive freedom, became the new, volatile focal point of our renewed, yet still strained discussions. David, still reeling from the cascading revelations about his mother's past and the agonizing echoes of his own, felt an overwhelming, almost sacred responsibility to honor Beatrice's wishes, to fulfill her life's work. He proposed, with a fervor that bordered on obsession, that we use a significant portion of the inheritance to establish a new, much larger women's shelter right here in New York City. This wasn't just any shelter, it was envisioned as a comprehensive sanctuary, one that would specifically offer unwavering support, vital resources, and a safe haven for women facing difficult, often impossible reproductive choices, much like Sarah had, much like his own mother had, decades ago. It was a noble, undeniably powerful idea, a direct, tangible continuation of Beatrice's quiet, lifelong rebellion. And I realized with a pang, a profound way for David to finally atone for his past inaction, his youthful cowardice. But the sheer scale of it, the breathtaking financial commitment it demanded, terrified me to my core. Our mortgage, our shared hard-won dream of financial freedom, still loomed large, a constant, nagging worry in the back of my mind. David, I argued, my voice tight with a fear I couldn't quite suppress, a fear that felt both selfish and entirely rational. We're so incredibly close to paying off the condo. This is a monumental amount of money. Can't we start with something smaller, something more manageable first? Something that doesn't jeopardize our own stability, our own future? My hesitation, born of pragmatism and a deep-seated need for security, was immediately misconstrued. He saw my caution as a profound lack of commitment to the cause, a selfishness that stung him deeply, cutting through the fragile peace we had found. "This isn't just about money, Sarah," he retorted, his voice sharp, laced with a rare, chilling formality that sent a shiver down my spine. This is about righting wrongs. This is about preventing other women from going through what Sarah went through, what my mother went through. This is about justice. The chasm between us, which had just begun to tentatively close, widened once more, filled with the echoing ghosts of past traumas, conflicting priorities, and the suffocating weight of unspoken expectations. It was during a particularly heated, emotionally charged argument about the shelter's exact location that the game-changing, utterly devastating revelation occurred. David, consumed by his mission, had been meticulously researching potential properties, poring over dusty blueprints, deciphering complex zoning laws. His mind a whirlwind of architectural possibilities. He had finally found an old, abandoned building in a historic, yet neglected, part of Brooklyn, a place with a rich, if tragically forgotten, past. As he excitedly showed me the architectural plans, his finger tracing potential renovations, my eyes, almost by accident, snagged on a faded, almost illegible name etched into the corner of one of the original yellow blueprints, the Eleanor Vance Home for Unwed Mothers. My breath hitched in my throat, a cold, suffocating knot. Vance. That was Eleanor's maiden name. The building, the very one David was so passionately, so fervently advocating for, the one he envisioned transforming into a beacon of hope and sanctuary, had once been a place of shame and forced conformity. It had been a place where women like his mother, young, vulnerable women facing unplanned pregnancies, were sent away, hidden from polite society, their lives erased, their choices dictated. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening, soul-crushing thud. Eleanor's forced adoption, her deep-seated, corrosive shame, her almost pathological need to control David's choices, her relentless interference in Sarah's life. Every single agonizing piece stemmed from this. She hadn't just been forced to give up her baby. She'd been sent to this very institution, a place designed not for support, but for erasure, a place that had systematically stripped her of her agency, forcing her to conform to a brutal, unforgiving societal norm. The irony was brutal, a cruel, almost unbearable twist of fate that bound them all, Eleanor, David, Sarah, and even me, to this one physical location, this silent, stone-cold witness to generations of pain. The building wasn't just a potential shelter, it was a living, breathing monument to Eleanor's hidden pain, a silent, screaming testament to the very trauma she had unknowingly, tragically inflicted on others. David stood frozen, utterly paralyzed by the enormity of the discovery, the blueprints trembling violently in his hands. His face a mask of dawning horror. The weight of this revelation was immense, crushing, recontextualizing not just Eleanor's entire life, but his own, and by extension, ours. His mother, the formidable, often cruel woman he had always seen as domineering, judgmental, and unyielding, was also a victim, a terrified young woman stripped of her agency, forced to make an impossible choice in a society that offered her no other options, no compassion, no understanding. His long-held anger, his deep-seated resentment, began to dissolve, melting away like snow in a sudden thaw, replaced by a profound, aching empathy that twisted his features. He saw her not as the villain, the antagonist in his life story, but as a tragic product of her own suffering, a woman who had never healed from her past, and in her brokenness, had with a heartbreaking inevitability, perpetuated the very cycle of pain that had defined her own existence. This earth-shattering revelation led to the most intense, emotionally charged peak of our story, a confrontation not of anger or accusation, but of raw, exposed vulnerability, a desperate plea for understanding. David, armed with this new, devastating knowledge, drove immediately to the anonymous hotel where Eleanor was still staying, stubbornly refusing to return home, her pride still a brittle shield. I went with him, a silent, trembling witness to the unfolding drama, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He found her in her room, meticulously, almost ritualistically, packing her belongings, her face still etched with a stubborn, defiant pride. He didn't accuse her. There was no need for words of blame. He simply walked over to the bed, his movements slow and deliberate, and laid the crumpled blueprint on the pristine white duvet, pointing a trembling finger to her maiden name. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with a raw, guttural emotion I had never heard before. I know everything." Eleanor's carefully constructed facade, the impenetrable walls she had built around herself for decades, crumbled in an instant. The years of meticulously maintained defenses collapsed, revealing the terrified, heartbroken young woman beneath, a ghost of her former self. She sank onto the bed, her body racked with convulsive sobs, tears streaming down her face, carving paths through years of unspoken grief. And for the very first time, she spoke of her past, not with bitterness or anger, but with a heart-wrenching sorrow that pierced through the very air. She recounted the suffocating shame, the crushing isolation, the agonizing, soul-destroying pain of giving up her child, a child she had never forgotten. She spoke of how she had tried, in her own twisted, misguided way, to protect David from a similar fate, how her own deep-seated fear, her own unhealed trauma, had warped her actions, making her the very person she had once despised, the very person who had taken her child away. It was a confession born of decades of suppressed grief, a torrent of pain that finally, mercifully found its release, washing over us all like a tidal wave. In that singular, transformative moment, David underwent a profound, irreversible character transformation. He didn't just forgive his mother, he understood her truly, deeply for the first time in his life. He saw the insidious generational trauma, the relentless societal pressures that had shaped her, twisted her, and he recognized the agonizing echoes of that pain in his own life, in Sarah's tragic story, in our own struggles, and the very fabric of our fractured family. He reached out not to console her, not to offer empty platitudes, but to connect, to bridge the vast, echoing chasm of years of misunderstanding, of silence, of pain. He held her, his mother, not as the formidable, unapproachable matriarch, but as a wounded, fragile soul, a fellow survivor of a cruel world. And in that raw, vulnerable embrace, a fragile, tentative healing began, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. It was a confrontation, yes, a brutal, emotionally draining clash, but one that stripped away the layers of anger, blame, and resentment, leaving behind only the raw, undeniable truth of shared humanity, of interconnected pain, and the faint, flickering possibility of redemption. This moment shattered everything I knew. If you're feeling this shock too, hit like. It helps uncover more hidden family truths. The aftermath of Eleanor's gut-wrenching confession and David's profound, almost spiritual transformation was not a sudden, miraculous healing, not a Hollywood-esque montage of instant reconciliation, but a slow, arduous, and often painful process of rebuilding. The immediate consequence was a seismic shift in our family dynamic, a quiet revolution that reshaped the very foundations of our relationships. Eleanor, stripped bare of her defenses, humbled and utterly vulnerable, returned to her home in Alaska, but this time, with a solemn promise to seek therapy, to finally confront the deep-seated demons of her past, to untangle the knots of grief and shame that had bound her for so long. Her calls to David, once filled with biting judgment and thinly veiled accusations, were now softer, filled with tentative apologies, genuine expressions of remorse, and fragile attempts at true connection. She even sent me a small handwritten note, a simple yet profoundly meaningful "I'm sorry" that, despite its brevity, spoke volumes, a tiny olive branch extended across a vast emotional chasm. David, too, was irrevocably changed, transformed by the weight of his discoveries. The crushing burden of his past, the gnawing guilt over Sarah, began to lift, replaced by a fierce, almost unshakable determination to make a tangible difference in the world. He decided to move forward with the Women's Shelter Project, but with a crucial, thoughtful modification. Instead of impulsively using the entire inheritance, he proposed a phased, sustainable approach, starting with a smaller, more manageable facility, a pilot program that could be scaled. The remaining substantial funds would be meticulously invested to establish a robust endowment, ensuring the shelter's long-term sustainability and continued impact. He also, crucially, recommitted to his work in tech, understanding the importance of maintaining our financial stability and securing the eventual payoff of our mortgage. It was a balanced, mature approach, honoring Beatrice's powerful legacy while simultaneously safeguarding our own future, our own fragile peace. Our relationship, once fractured by layers of secrets, unspoken resentments, and emotional distance, began slowly and painstakingly to mend. We spent countless hours talking, truly listening to each other, our conversations delving into the deepest recesses of our hearts, unpacking the complex layers of hurt, misunderstanding, and generational trauma. I shared my deepest fears, my anxieties about our financial future, my fear of being lost in his grander mission, and he in turn expressed his profound need to find purpose beyond personal gain, beyond the pursuit of material wealth. We learned through trial and error to navigate our differences with a newfound empathy, respect, and a deeper understanding of each other's vulnerabilities. We finally understood that our individual past, our complex family histories were inextricably linked, two sides of the same coin, shaping who we were both individually and as a couple. The trust, once shattered, was slowly, painstakingly rewoven, thread by fragile thread, stronger for having been tested, more resilient for having survived this storm. Character growth was evident, not just in David, but in both of us, a quiet internal blossoming. David, once prone to avoidance, secrecy, and a tendency to retreat into himself, became more open, more communicative, more present. He learned through painful experience to balance his fervent passion for advocacy with his fundamental responsibilities to our family, to me. I too found a new strength, a voice I hadn't realized I possessed, a quiet confidence that emerged from the crucible of our shared ordeal. I became an active, integral partner in the shelter project, using my graphic design skills to create their branding, their website, their outreach materials, pouring my creative energy into a cause that now felt deeply personal. It was a profound way for me to contribute, to find meaning in the chaos, and to heal some of my own lingering wounds by actively helping others, by being a part of something larger than myself. The thought-provoking ending was not a neat saccharine Hollywood-esque happily ever after, but a realistic, nuanced portrayal of a family grappling with complex, deeply ingrained issues, a testament to the messy, beautiful reality of human relationships. The shelter, proudly named Beatrice's Haven, eventually opened its doors, a vibrant beacon of hope and healing, ironically, in the very building that had once symbolized Eleanor's profound pain and societal condemnation. It became a sacred space of healing, a testament to the transformative power of understanding, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief in second chances. Our mortgage, the relentless burden that had shaped so much of our early marriage, was eventually paid off, and our condo, once a silent battleground of unspoken resentments, became a true home, a sanctuary built not just on bricks and mortar, but on honesty, shared purpose, and a love that had been forged in the fires of adversity. Eleanor, though still living in the remote reaches of Alaska, became a regular, if still somewhat reserved, visitor. Her interactions were softer, her judgments fewer, replaced by a quiet, almost wistful affection. She even volunteered to knit blankets for the shelter, each stitch a silent, tangible gesture of reconciliation, a thread connecting her to the legacy she had once fought against. The scars remained, of course, deep and indelible, but they were no longer festering wounds. They were reminders of a painful past, yes, but also of the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of empathy, and the transformative, redemptive force of truth. In the years that followed, Beatrice's Haven flourished, expanding its services to include legal aid, job training, and childcare, becoming a comprehensive support system for women in need. David, true to his word, continued his work in tech, but he also became a prominent voice in the advocacy community, using his platform to champion women's rights and share his family's story with Eleanor's blessing. His transformation was complete. He was no longer a man haunted by his past, but a man empowered by it. A man who had turned his pain into purpose. And me? I found a new calling, a new passion. I left my corporate design job and became the full-time creative director for Beatrice's Haven, my work now infused with a sense of meaning I had never known. Our lives, once a chaotic whirlwind of conflicting desires and unspoken resentments, had found a new, harmonious rhythm. We were no longer just two people in a race against a mortgage. We were partners in every sense of the word, bound by a shared history, a shared purpose, and a love that had not only survived the storm, but had emerged from it, stronger, deeper, and more resilient than ever before. I still lie awake wondering, what would you have done when they tried to control your body? Share your truth in the comments. Subscribe for more shocking family revelations. As David delved deeper into Aunt Beatrice's legacy, he uncovered a network of hidden connections, a subtle tapestry woven through decades of quiet activism. He found old letters meticulously preserved from women Beatrice had helped, their stories echoing with themes of forced choices, societal pressures, and the desperate search for agency. One particular series of letters from a woman named Maria resonated deeply. Maria had been a young, undocumented immigrant, pregnant and alone, facing deportation and the impossible choice between her child and her freedom. Beatrice had not only provided her with sanctuary, but had also navigated the labyrinthine legal system to secure her asylum and ensure her child's safe birth. Maria's story, a testament to Beatrice's unwavering compassion, became a powerful motivator for David. He saw in it the universal struggle for bodily autonomy and the profound impact of a single act of kindness. This subplot, initially a background detail, began to intertwine with our own narrative. David, inspired by Maria's resilience, started volunteering at a local immigration legal aid clinic, using his tech skills to streamline their case management system. He became a fierce advocate for immigrant women, recognizing the intersectionality of their struggles with those Beatrice had championed. This new commitment, while admirable, further strained our relationship. His nights were now divided between his demanding job, the women's shelter project, and the legal aid clinic. I felt increasingly sidelined, a silent observer to his burgeoning heroism. My own work, once a source of pride and financial independence, began to feel insignificant in comparison to his grand, world-changing endeavors. The quiet unease I had felt before morphed into a gnawing resentment, a feeling that I was losing him to a cause that, while noble, was consuming him entirely. Our conversations became transactional, focused on logistics and schedules rather than shared dreams and intimate moments. The condo, once a symbol of our shared future, now felt like a lonely outpost, a place where we merely coexisted. I tried to express my feelings, my fear of being left behind, but David, consumed by his mission, seemed unable to truly hear me. He saw my concerns as petty, my anxieties as a distraction from the greater good. This emotional distance, this growing chasm between us, became a silent subplot of its own, a slow-burning fuse threatening to ignite a new, more personal conflict. Throughout this period, my own psychological landscape became increasingly complex. I was torn between my admiration for David's newfound purpose and my deep-seated fear for our relationship. I found myself replaying Eleanor's words, her accusations of my selfishness, her warnings about the fragility of our marriage. Was she right? Was I being selfish to want David's attention, his presence when there were so many larger battles to fight? The guilt was a heavy cloak, suffocating my own needs and desires. I began to question my own identity, my worth, beyond my role as David's wife and a contributor to our mortgage. My nocturnal work, once a source of empowerment, became a refuge, a place where I could escape the emotional turmoil of our home life. I poured myself into my designs, creating intricate, vibrant worlds on my screen, a stark contrast to the muted, strained reality of my days. But even there, the shadows of our conflict loomed. I found myself designing darker, more introspective pieces, my art reflecting the internal chaos I was experiencing. The emotional intensity building within me was a pressure cooker, a silent scream waiting to be unleashed. I yearned for the intimacy we once shared, the easy laughter, the shared dreams. But every attempt to bridge the gap felt futile, met with David's distracted nods and vague assurances. The varied pacing of our lives, once harmonious, now felt disjointed, a discordant symphony of unspoken needs and unaddressed hurts. The subplots of our individual struggles, David's mission, and my growing isolation were slowly, inexorably enriching the main narrative with a layer of raw, relatable human experience, setting the stage for an even more powerful climax.